The other night, I finally caught up with Sam Mendes' 1917, which took home the Golden Globe for Best Picture a couple weeks ago and netted him the Best Director award. And I was kind of surprised. I thought there were other higher profile films that had been kind of on the circuit for a while that would surely take home that top award. But in fairness, I hadn't seen the movie. Yes, I missed it during voting award season late last year, which is a shame because if I had found time to watch it, it definitely would have made my top 19 films of 2019. But, you know, we do what we can. So, in watching 1917, I kept thinking about the criticisms that had been leveled at the film. And I went in, having not read any reviews, but definitely hearing some of the talk, the hype around it. Certainly it's a big technical masterpiece, having been filmed and edited in such a way to make it look like one continuous take. This World War I adventure through Nazi-occupied France involving these two young lance corporals. But I had heard that in presenting this spectacle and pulling off this great technical feat, the characterization had suffered. So that was in the back of my mind while I was watching it. And it was a puzzlement because halfway through the film, and I'm not going to give any spoilers away here, but I was crying, and I was very much invested in what was going on the screen with the people I was seeing and meeting, getting involved in their stories, and in this daring adventure. Essentially, these two soldiers have to make it to a battalion of other soldiers in order to keep them from walking into a trap. If they don't succeed within the course of, I think, 12 hours, then 1,600 people are going to die. So high stakes. One of those people is the brother of one of the young lance corporals in question. It does have a very sort of Saving Private Ryan vibe to the premise. However, this story is, based. It is rooted in historical truth in that Mendes' grandfather, who was a World War I veteran, recounted this story to his family. So I haven't looked into the veracity of the details of it, but it is a story that we are meant to believe happened, and based on what we see as filtered through Mendes' lens, it feels very believable. Now, again, I go back to this question of why was I told beforehand that characterization suffers to make the rest of the movie happen when demonstrably, for me anyway, and art is subjective, I understand that, I found the characters to be not only very rich but also integral to the film's success. If you look at Rotten Tomatoes, this movie currently has an 89% approval rating by critics, but even the positive reviews, the negative reviews almost uniformly slam the movie for not having any good characters in it. Even the positive reviews, though, say that yes, it's a technical masterpiece, and thank God, because there are no characters there. I found that to be kind of outrageous, and I got a little bit indignant and was compelled to make this video. Couple of things I want to talk about. First of all, the movie itself does come from a very long and proud tradition of the quote-unquote single-take film, going back to Alfred Hitchcock's Rope and probably some movies before that. You also have films like Children of Men and Birdman and Atonement, which was the first time that I really noticed this phenomenon taking place. All very well executed and with pretty rich characters. You also have movies like Victoria, which came out a few years ago, which is as close to a real-time single-shot kind of movie that you're going to get. With those other films I had mentioned, they either have elements that were filmed in a single take that are really grandly orchestrated, that are fit into a more traditionally edited film, or they are movies that take place over a certain period of time. Not necessarily everything happens in 2 hours. It might happen over 9 hours, but it's stitched together so the audience feels like it's one continuous take. Victoria, from my recollection, was a film that the rule was when they set out to make it, it's 2 or 2.5 hours long, I believe. They start filming and then they stop filming when the story is over, and it was a master feat of coordination and performance. It was very impressive, so definitely seek that out. There is another film by Woody Harrelson. I promise I'll get back to 1917 in a second. I'm just trying to give some context. There's a Woody Harrelson film from 2 years ago, I believe, It was a Fathom event, and I don't know if it's actually been released on video anywhere, but it was one of those situations, one of those rare situations where you go to the theater and you watch a film being made live in front of your eyes, and it is a real-time movie in that sense, complete with, actors forgetting their lines and having to improv, on the spot, to coordinating, these not stunts, but people acting and carrying out scenes on the London Bridge. And it was Woody Harrelson's directorial debut, and it was ambitious, but it was a tremendous success, I thought, from both an execution and also a story standpoint. And performances were fun and all that good stuff. But coming back to 1917, this is definitely a movie where the characters are as important to the story as the time clock element to it. We don't learn a whole lot about Lance Corporal Blake or Lance Corporal Schofield, played by Dean Charles Chapman and George McKay, respectively. But my question is, how much of a backstory are they supposed to have? They're probably 18, maybe 20 years old at most, so they're not going to have, the baggage of a 20-year adult life to share with an audience or with each other. Also, part of what made that generation, and the greatest generation, as they're called, who came after and fought World War II, was the fact that these were, regular people who were drawn up to fight, in a world war, a global conflict that was unparalleled. Their backstory was, ostensibly what I don't know these particular characters necessarily, but it's not like they were superheroes in regular life. It's not a Captain America situation where a guy shows up and gets a superhero serum that helps him reverse the lifetime of bullying because he was skinny, and then he goes to fight the Nazis. It's not one of those situations. The heroism comes from everyday people taking up arms to save the world, and that's definitely what we have here. We get snippets of Schofield's an incident that happened where he won a medal for saving people, but we come to find out that it's not all it's cracked up to be in his mind, and indeed in the minds of other people. There is some back and forth about between the soldiers about what does war mean and what does valor mean, and wouldn't it be great to win a medal? And other people say it's really not. In fact, it's probably one of the worst things that can happen. So we get that little bit of insight there. There's also some back and forth about not necessarily back and forth, but the banter between the two main soldiers. They're trying to keep each other entertained and tell jokes and stories while also trying to survive. It does feel very real, but what we don't get are these long, corny monologues about, well, I was a poor farmer who grew up and all I wanted to do was go and fight the empire, kind of a thing, or my dad was a drunk and my mom was, abusive, or she didn't care, so I ran away to join the military and now I'm, trying to save my countrymen, that kind of a deal. It is not a very an overly written script. It is definitely a subjective movie that gets out of its own way in telling this very personal story. And I can tell from just watching the movie that this is, yes, it's a quote-unquote Oscar bait picture. It's a studio film. It's very expensive. There are a lot of stars who show up in cameos. I mean, you've got basically all the English star hits. You've got Andrew Scott and Colin Firth and Benedict Cumberbatch and Mark Strong, people you kind of expect to see in these high-profile movies, but they're uniformly terrific in the 5 to 10 minutes that we see of them. It's not gimmicky. They don't come in and take over the picture. This movie belongs to the two young actors who are playing these key roles. And as far as other war movies, you look at Dunkirk, which was another film that sort of everyone talked about the spectacle of how this movie was put together rather than the characters. And I would argue that the characters in 1917 are stronger than the ones in Dunkirk, only because we spend the entire movie with these, specific people that we start out with, for the most part. I'm going to try and avoid any kind of spoilers or talk about, events that happen in the film, because I think it should be seen relatively sight unseen. So avoid spoilers, avoid trailers if you can. Just go see it based on the word of mouth and my recommendation, of course. But Yeah, Dunkirk had a few different stories, and it also jumped across time, so it was hard to kind of get a latch on things. The sound design was a bit wonky, so I still don't know anyone who understood what the hell Tom Hardy was saying in that cockpit. But with 1917, we've got these two characters going on this mission, relating to each other, saving each other, and fighting for what they believe in, and that is essentially themselves and the people that they're trying to save. The idea of the greater purpose of the war, that doesn't get spelled out a whole bunch in terms of these grand statements about politics or anything like that. So it's kind of refreshing, and again, very subjective. People don't relate to each other, or at least they didn't, and maybe they even still don't. I can't tell what social media would have been like in 1917, but there's no soapboxing or virtue signaling or anything like that. It's a straightforward story. But then you look at a movie like Saving Private Ryan, which is heralded as a classic. That was a World War II story, of course. And yeah, you get to spend a little bit more time with the characters, but again, it's characters sort of telling stories, things from back home. The personality of the actors comes through and sort of fills in some of those story blanks. So you're not talking about really richly drawn characters who all get these fantastic story arcs. For some reason, people are beating up on Mendes' use of characterization in the film, and I think I gotta file a false claim there. I hesitate to say this next bit, but I feel like it's critics looking for something in a movie and not getting it that regular moviegoers will go see and pick up on right away. That's sort of a dig against critics, I guess. We sort of expect everything to be deeply layered with meaning, and everybody to stand for something or represent a motif and have these big grand arcs. But sometimes simple is better. And in the simplicity of this story, I got a lot of deep meaning out of it. And again, this isn't spoiling anything, but maybe if you go watch 1917 with these things in mind, it might help you get over some humps if you have them at all. The first is that I mentioned that these guys are too young to have a backstory, and that their lack of heroism leading up to the war is part of what made them so extraordinary in battle. But the other thing to think about is, there's two things. One, this is the backstory that they're going to be talking about, and that their generations of their families will be talking about for years to come. The second part of that is, for some of these characters, regardless of whether or not they make it through the film, they might not have generations to come, because as we all know, after World War I ended, we had World War II and subsequent conflicts throughout the world. So it's entirely possible that these stories were told for a little while, and then other sadder tales were told about particular folks who appeared in the film. The other thing to consider is the idea that the horrors that we see in this film, and there's a lot that the audience is invited to fill in just by looking at the scenery. In that respect, it's very similar to Children of Men, where there's not a backstory about how they're, in that film, infertility and the last person on Earth being born led to this sort of apocalyptic narrative. The clues to what caused that are all over the movie. They're just not spelled out, and there are a handful of different possible explanations. In 1917, we see battlefields littered with bodies, but bodies that are laid out in various horrific and sometimes interesting ways. The landscape, it's cheesy to say, is a character in this movie, but it talks a lot about what the people who have come and gone before this story happened, what they've experienced, what that means, and what it means to commit people to war. It's not just soldiers, it's not just a battlefield, it's human beings with fully rich, developed lives going into these horrible places and killing each other. For what? It's like that song, War, What Is It Good For? This movie definitely calls that thesis into question, or I guess asked that big question. But when you stop and think that these characters, the people who survived World War I, and then got drawn into World War II, even though they would have been older at that point, it's still a national/global crisis. They have to go through this stuff all over again. Now, granted, the technology and health and weaponry and all that stuff had changed in the intervening years, but it still didn't get much better. I mean, trench warfare is hell, but so is having bombers going over and taking out Dresden. So if you look at the film in terms of what it's trying to say, it's made in 2020 at a time when many people believe that we are on the brink of war, or just narrowly a skirted war, or that war is just around the corner. What does that mean? Is something that people think about in the abstract, because we, in our comfy latter half of the 20th century, dawn of the 21st century, particularly the Western world, haven't had to deal with those realities. We are very much sheltered and placed in a bubble. This asks us to consider what it would look like if people had to take up arms and go to foreign lands, or fight in our streets. There's nothing glamorous about it. It's sad, it's horrifying, and as they say, war is hell. So this is an important movie, and even though it doesn't have characters giving these fantastic, rich, make you weep openly and win best screenplay monologues, it does talk a lot about the characters, the people of the past, and also asks a lot of the people of the present. So in that sense, the audience is the unwritten character in this drama. We are just as important to the reason why this movie was told and how it was told, I think, as anybody who actually appears on screen or helped put it together. So yeah, I don't think I have much else to say, and I didn't expect to talk this long about 1917, but I do think that it's worth kind of defending a little bit. Yeah, like I said, even the people who write positively about this movie give it sort of a backhanded compliment, because they say, yeah, it looks great, sounds great, feels wonderful, but there's nobody to root for, and all the characters sort of cutouts. I find that to be absolutely not the case. And if you have seen the movie and you feel differently, if you go see the movie and you feel differently, or if you feel the same, I invite you to please leave a comment below and let me know how right on the dot I am, or how full of crap I am. And also, while you're there, I want you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet. And I just want to thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me talk about a wonderful movie. So I'm going to cut this video off at 17 minutes, or within the 17-minute mark, sort of, so as to have that be thematically relevant or something. So until next time, whatever that is, thanks very much, and take care.